Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Becoming a Bible Nerd. We are on our 7th book study. I can't believe that, but we're going to start the book of Esther this morning. I hope you're in your PJs and comfy like me, and I've been drinking my coffee. So while we're letting people get on, I just kind of want to go over a few things if you're new with us. You need a study Bible. A study Bible is something that has commentary written at the bottom. Everyone has to say good morning. It's a rule. And I see y'all getting on. Thank y'all. And that just helps so much because it's other than that. It's me talking to myself in the living room. And that's very difficult if you haven't tried it. Anyway, you need a study Bible that has commentary at the bottom, study notes, and we can help you find the right one for you. And then if we study using other commentaries outside of our Bible, the best one to start with to me is the Bible Knowledge Commentary. It looks huge, but it's actually the whole Old Testament in this. But the write-ups aren't that long. They're not overwhelming. They're easy to read. We started using it because Beth Moore would reference it. But then as you grow and as you become more curious, there's other commentaries that are more in-depth out there. A lot of us are using Constable's notes that you can print off free from the internet or buy them bound. And these actually for Esther are not overwhelming. He didn't have a whole lot to say. So if you're new to Constable's notes, you should give him a try. So, my goodness, we have 40 people on already. So I will make my big announcement that I'm super excited to talk about. And you know, from the beginning, the Lord has told me before I guess I even knew that this thing was going to be a thing, that as it started becoming a thing and people were staying with me and finishing studies, that this was not mine. And a lot of times that's why I'm in my living room by myself and I say we, because really the Lord has been telling me there's going to be a lot of different gifts and talents to make Bible Nerds what it is. And we've seen that unfold, especially at the Awake Conference. That's something that Carrie and I could have never done on our own, and a lot of our amazing friends and family joined in. So, with that said, I'm super excited to announce that we are going to add a class on Tuesday mornings at 5:45 a.m. It's not going to be me. It's going to be some of your favorite teachers out there, and they're going to do series on discipleship. So, next Tuesday morning, we will kick this off at 5:45 a.m. with Katie Hunt. She taught at the Awake Conference a breakout session called Fight Like a Mom, and she's going to do a series on this talk, so you'll get to hear a lot more in a lot more detail, things she didn't say at the conference on Tuesday mornings. Yes, I know, isn't it exciting? We already have the next 3 months lined up, so you're going to hear from a lot of amazing teachers, and I'm so thankful for that. So we're going to go ahead and get started this morning. We have a lot to talk about. This chapter, we're going to mostly be talking about background stuff because we don't really get into the story. The name of the book is Esther. We don't even meet her until chapter 2. So bear with us through chapter 1, and it's going to get really good. This is like a fairy tale. It's written like a fairy tale. The author is unknown, but he was a master Hebrew storyteller. This book is different than any other book in the Bible, and it doesn't mention God. I know that you found that out through your study time. But before we talk a little bit about that, I want to back up. We will have the Await Conference videos posted later this weekend on the website, so be looking for that. I give the introduction in my talk, and we talked about how at this period of time that Esther is set, it's during the Babylonian exile. That means that Israel lived in their promised land that God has set up for them, and still to this day, he has given to his people. But there was a time where they turned from God and they began doing things, sinful, wicked things, and they removed themselves from God's protection. And so the Babylonians came and they overtook them. And because the Jewish people are such a pain in the butt, King Nebuchadnezzar made them leave their land and be scattered so that they couldn't be a united people. So they lived in Babylon where everything was lush and there was a lot of opulence. And they began to have to intermingle with a culture that was very different than their own. Well, one of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams in the book of Daniel interprets it and says, after you, King Nebuchadnezzar, this great world empire, there's going to be 3 other empires to rise to power. And history has proven this dream to be true. So the empire that Daniel predicted that would overthrow the Babylonians was the Persian Empire. So that's where we're at in history. We're at the Persian Empire. They overthrow Babylon, and we don't understand how this works because we've been America. This was kind of a land where Indians roam, and all of a sudden we set up government, and we've been the same government. But in that day, when another empire overthrew, it's the same territory. They just changed their laws, and a lot of times they changed the language. So now the Persians have moved in. Now, some good things were happening with Persia. In the book of Daniel, it was prophesied that the Israelites would only be exiled for 70 years, and then there would be a king to rise up to let them return, and that was the king of Persia, Cyrus. He said that all the Israelites could return and rebuild their temple, but only a small percentage of them did that, because if you think about it, 70 years later, people like my age, we wouldn't know anything about that land. We would be married to different people from different nations. We would have our friends, our family, our career, and Israel was in ruin. So a lot of people didn't return, and that is where Esther fits. Her family did not return. There are 7 feasts that are in the law of Moses that must be celebrated, and some of those have to be celebrated at the temple. So the fact that they did not move home was kind of disobedient as far as how they were supposed to celebrate these different feasts. But we're seeing that God's going to move all through the scene. So we're back to, although God's name is never mentioned in the book, this is something really cool. Esther in the Bible, that name is a Persian name. Her Hebrew name is Hadassah, but the Hebrew writer does not call her Hadassah. He calls her Esther. And Esther means something hidden. So in this story, it's as if God is hidden. We don't put his name on the pages, but he's completely working behind the scenes. This book is, a lot of the commentators talk about God's providence is going to show up all through the book. Providence comes from a word meaning to see beforehand. God sees the big picture. He sees the beginning. He sees the end. And this book proves that he is supervising all things behind the scenes, and at the same time allowing free will. It blows my mind. He's in control, but we're still allowed to do what we choose to do, but he knows what we're going to choose to do, so his plan is perfect. In fact, 2 Timothy 2:13, we just went over 2 Timothy in the fall, and in chapter 2, if you remember, we talked a great deal on the scripture, and it was a perfect example of the scenario. Paul is telling Timothy, if we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. So even at a time where his children disobeyed, did not return to Israel, they are being faithless, he still is faithful to them. And he is setting up a way when somebody is going to try to annihilate the entire race of Hebrew people, he is setting up someone that is going to save the people and redeem them. So let's dig in. We're in chapter 1. And it starts off saying, these events took place during the days of Ahasuerus, who ruled 127 provinces from India to Cush. Okay, so we talked originally about King Cyrus letting the people go back to their original land in Israel. This is 4 generations later. His great-great-grandson, Ahasuerus, is now on the throne. The Persian Empire is at its height. He is a spoiled brat that has been handed everything on a silver platter. And for the sake of pronunciation, we are going to call this king Xerxes. This is his Greek name because, anyway, we're going to call him by his Greek name because it's easier to pronounce. His Hebrew name is Ahasuerus, and that is more of a title like Pharaoh or Caesar, something like that. This is the 3rd year of Xerxes' reign, and there's 127 provinces. It's kind of another word for counties, but just for us in our if we looked at a modern day map, this is what the Persian Empire would consist of: Turkey, Iran, Lebanon, Israel, Pakistan, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, Sudan, and Libya. This was enormous. And so, good morning, everybody. So this is how much territory the king has. And this story is set up in Shushan, or our Bibles will say Susa. This is the administrative capital. It'd be kind of like the Washington, D.C. of the land. He has 4 palaces, and that he'll kind of rotate depending on seasons, but this is his main palace that he's going to stay at. And at the very beginning of the story, we find out that he holds a 180-day feast. 6 months. That's crazy. The word for feast in the Hebrew language is to drink. So when we think of feast, like we think of Thanksgiving, you're going to have tons of food and everyone's sitting at a table. That is not what they're talking about. They are talking about a drunken party for 180 days. And the people that were invited to this banquet were the officials of the land, staff, armies, and nobles of all these 127 provinces. Scholars believe from historical documents that this was all a planning session to invade and conquer Greece. We know from Daniel's vision that Greece will later come and defeat the Persian Empire. And before Xerxes' reign, his dad, Darius the First, had a battle against the Greeks. It's the famous Battle of Marathon, where we get the word marathon, and the Greeks defeated him. So scholars believe he wanted to avenge his father's defeat, gather all of these people around, show them how vast the kingdom is, get them pumped up and say, hey, let's go defeat the Greeks. Many kings, they either wanted to do one of two things. They wanted to expand their territory like Xerxes, or they wanted to improve their kingdom. And we learned a lot about this with Herod the Great in the New Testament. His buildings and his roads and everything of the infrastructure of Israel was elaborate. But Xerxes wanted to expand his territory. So he ends up at the end of the 180 days throwing this lavish banquet. It just showed the opulence and wealth of the Persian Empire, and it was descriptive in the text. And what we need to understand is this is a honor-shame culture. And I think we probably, in all honesty, will never be able to wrap our minds around an honor-shame culture, because we are absolutely opposite of that. We are a do-what-you-feel, women's rights. I am an individual where in this society, family is everything. So what I do has a direct effect on my family, and if they are displeased with it, they will disown me. We're never going to understand that, but we need to go into the story understanding that this culture is 100% different than ours. It's an honor-shame culture. And because of that, in an honor-shame culture, hospitality is everything. The more hospitable you are, the more honor that you gain. And so this is almost a selfish motive of him. He is going to throw this lavish banquet because in return, his honor is going to be exalted because of it. We touched on this a little bit in our Advent study with Mary in this honor-shame society, because when the angel told her she was going to carry a child, she knew that for the rest of her life would be different, because people would view her shamefully because she got got pregnant out of wedlock in their eyes. In verse 8, it says that there was no restraint on the drinking. This was a Persian custom that the king determined how much drinking. So if the king drank a lot, the people had to drink a lot. If the king drank a little, the people couldn't outdrink him. So this was a common Persian custom, but because he was trying to win them over, he went ahead and lifted this custom and said, you do what you want. Do what feels good to you. So he's smoozing them as much as he can. This honor-shame culture was extreme in Persia. There's different levels of it in the Middle East, but we need to go in knowing that this is an extreme sight of this in the Persian Empire. In fact, there was a law in the land that when men partied and drank, the women could not be around, which is so crazy in our society, because when men party and drink, they want the women around. But in this society, modesty for women was everything, and it was immodest for them to be in the presence of men during all of this drunkenness. So while he was having all the officials for all this time partying and drinking with them, it was his queen Vashti's job to meet with the wives and entertain them separately. This was a law. So that's what she's been doing the whole time. So in verse 10, we have to start paying attention to some numbers that are given off. In verse 10, we learn that on the 7th day, tuck that away, on the 7th day of this banquet, the king gets 7 eunuchs to go get Vashti to show off her beauty. The 7th day, he sends 7 eunuchs. Now, eunuch is a cabinet official or a servant that serves the royal family that has been castrated because they want to ensure that these servants are not going to sleep with the women. And a lot of times, like in this case, there's concubines, there's a lot of wives, there's women everywhere. They serve them and they don't want any hanky-panky. So they castrate these men. We were introduced to Ethiopian eunuch when we studied Acts and learned a little bit about that tradition. So, seventh day, 7 eunuchs to bring Vashti to show off her beauty. This was against the law. And she doesn't come. And there has been a lot of speculation of why she didn't come, and we will never know. But I'm going to talk about my theory this morning. I saw some of y'all's theories online, and I think that is so cool. I love how there was a lot of conversation going online and people trying to figure out and people posing questions and people sharing what God spoke to them through this. I hope that that continues throughout the study, and I hope it grows, because that is a taste of what happens when you get people together and study this in a real room with real people. That's exactly what we would do. We would hash this out, and people would say, well, my commentary said this. Well, my commentary said this. And we would kind of figure all of this out and come to a conclusion, and it was so much fun. And in fact, that is a common thing that the rabbis would do in Jesus's day. They would get together, they would argue scripture, not in a mean way, but almost debate. That would be a better word, debate. This is not something that is ever meant to divide us. In fact, Paul warns about this in the letters to Timothy. Don't let this divide us, but let's have fun and let's challenge one another and let's play the devil's advocate and search the scriptures out, because then we'll have a more depth study in this. So, 3 traditions on why Vashti denied the invitation to come. There's a very common one, that she was asked to come naked. There was one common one that Gabriel told her not to go, the angel Gabriel. A third one is that she was just arrogant. And these are my arguments against these things. One, everyone that I study about the culture of this era all say, they all had the same advice, that this rumor that she came naked came from Jewish rabbis, and they had a tendency to grossly exaggerate the truths of other cultures because they were already disgusted by them and they wanted them to look more disgusting. And so a lot of people think that this is exaggerated truths to make pagans sound worse. For Gabriel, told her not to go. She was, this was a pagan land, and this is a pagan tradition. Most scholars don't believe that Gabriel spoke to her. And the third one of it, her being arrogant, is just not culturally accurate. It doesn't fit in this culture because your arrogance will get you beheaded or tortured. And so what the people that study honor shame cultures all have concluded is that it is against the law for her to go. He made this decision in a drunken state. If she goes, she will be shamed for the rest of her life. And if she doesn't go, she could possibly get death. But in that culture, for a woman, shame is worse than death. So someone would rather die than to live the rest of their life with shame. And it's not just you're carrying shame. You are ostracized from a community. She would never have a chance to remarry someone. No one would want her as a wife because she had been shamed. So that is my theory, is that she was in a catch-22. If she goes, her life is going to be over. If she stays, then she's probably going to be ousted by the king, but at least she would have her honor. The king couldn't say at the end, oh, my bad, I was drunk. What was I thinking? And so he's in a pickle too, because now he's humiliated and he has to act upon it, even though I'm sure whenever he sobered up, he realized this was a very dumb thing for me to do. And so what he ends up doing is he's got to figure out how to fix this. So he goes to his council of wise men. We talked about these wise men in the Advent study. This is an ancient group of men that are as old as the Chaldeans. That's Abraham, lived in this region that became Babylon in Mesopotamia before he ever was called to go to the Promised Land. So this Chaldean people, they are ancient people, and these wise men had risen up since then, and they were active in almost every world empire that rose up in this Asian part of the world. They were astrologists, so they studied the stars, and they mixed astronomy and astrology together. So it was almost like magic and stars, and they would always be advisors to the king. And so he goes to these and he consulted 7 wise men. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a second. We're going to talk about the 7. It was on the 7th day of the banquet that Vashti was asked to come in. There were 7 eunuchs. There were 7 wise men. This number 7 is continual through Scripture. Some of you have looked and noticed it on your own, but to a Jewish person reading this was as if God's name was written all over the pages. 7 was everything. Numerology was of great importance to the ancient Jews, and it meant God was in control, and it meant completeness. God created the earth in 7 days, and then it was complete. This number was as if God was written on the pages. To them, they know he's all through this story. And so he ends up asking these wise men what to do. And just like any good drama, this is such a good story, and it's written very dramatically. The head of these wise men, Memicon, spun the story, and they came up with this plot that they said that there's grave dangers in all of the marriages over the empire because of Vashti's response. So all of a sudden, now all these women are going to rebel against their husbands. Well, that is so unlikely, because in this honor-shame society that still exists to this very day, one queen's actions doesn't have enough power to change the society as a whole. So they are really just they're just spinning this story. I lost my train of thought. So they go on to say that all the marriages are in grave danger. Another thing is there's no women at this banquet to even know that this happened, and no man is dare going to go home and tell his wife, oh, Vashti rebelled, because that would give their wife power. So it would be likely that this story wouldn't even be spread through the land, but they thought, let's spin it. It's very absurd, and they made a new law that Vashti, and at this point, she doesn't carry the title queen in front of her ever again, that Vashti can never be in the presence of the king, and she literally falls off the pages of the Bible, never to be mentioned again. In fact, she's not even found in Persian historical books, and a lot of people believe that's because Vashti wasn't her name, but it was a title. So letters are sent out to everyone in the kingdom. This is a complete overreaction, it seems, but they are sent out in every language all over the empire, to explain that all of a sudden now men need to hold the primary language in the home. So in this empire that was vast, the people were allowed to keep their heritage, their language, which is rare, because when Greece comes in, they are going to force everyone to learn and to use the Greek language. But remember, King Cyrus was kind of a social justice warrior, and he allowed people to have their same heritage and language. And so this message went out basically saying because there were intermarriages from different cultures, the man in the household controls the language of the house, and women need to submit to men, which they were already doing in this honor-shame society. So this is where we're going to stop this morning. Next week, we get to meet Queen Esther, the heroine of the story. It's going to really get good. There's a lot of drama involved here, and I want you to go into chapter 2 knowing that chapter 2 starts 3 years later. These 10 chapters happen over a 10-year period. We will go through them in just a couple of short months, but we need to keep in mind that this is a 10-year period. So tune in next Tuesday to listen to some great information on discipling your children with Katie Hunt, and then tune in next Thursday to talk about chapter 2. This is a great start, or a great way for you to maybe gather some younger people in your life and say, hey, do y'all want to come together, study this book, because it's fun, it's a fairy tale, and at the same time you can teach your children, you can teach younger women in the church how to read the Bible, and you can use anything that I say and act like it's your own, because I got it from other people too. Anyway, we hope you have a great week, and happy reading.